Let's talk about Jeff Bezos, one of the richest and most powerful men in the world.
Was the news that Senator Bernie Sanders introduced new legislation that he is calling the Bezos Act, taking a huge shot at Amazon's Jeff Bezos.
Like Jeff Bezos, for instance.
You think he thinks of himself as a god?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
A huge number of Amazon workers are so poorly paid, they qualify for federal welfare benefits.
Amazon, which has seen its sales soar, not surprisingly, is now hiring 100,000 new warehouse and delivery people. Workers across the country have said the conditions inside the warehouses are unsafe.
The e-commerce giant agreed to pay nearly $62 million to settle charges it skimmed tips for delivery drivers. The Federal Trade Commission says Amazon began pocketing some tips from customers to drivers between 2016 and 2019.
If a real person got caught at a bar stealing tips from the table, there'd be a fight. If a company does something that would get a person's ass beat, then that company has to pick an executive to get his ass beat.
Well, conservatives like us support the free market, and for good reason. The free market works. But there's nothing free about this market. A lot of these companies operate as monopolies.
It's come to no surprise that Jeff Bezos has been scrutinized by the media over and over again. He's been accused of exploiting his workers and putting them in slave-like conditions.
You have security cameras right behind you at all times that are looking at you 24/7. And if you don't meet standards or the rates, you're out the door, you're just disposable.
He's also known to crush small businesses, either by taking over them, buying them out, or just lowering prices for their industry enough to be able to run them out of business.
Reports that Amazon has nearly 7 times the market share of its closest competitor. During this investigation, we have heard so many heartbreaking stories of small businesses who sunk significant time and resources into building a business and selling on Amazon, only to have Amazon poach their best-selling items and drive them out of business.
I believe there are a lot of options for small sellers. I believe Amazon is a great one, and we've worked very hard. I think we are the best one.
Let's take a quick step back. We need to know who Jeff Bezos is. How did he actually become one of the richest and most powerful men in the world? Jeff Bezos was born in New Mexico in 1964. He grew up in Houston, Texas, and moved to Miami, Florida when he started in high school. From the very beginning, Jeff had an interest in both science and technology. He received accolades in high school, becoming a class valedictorian. He had big dreams and an even bigger imagination. This was never more apparent than during his valedictorian speech when he shared his ideas of colonizing space and making Earth one giant national park, which is a little far out, Jeff. But nonetheless, after high school, he graduated summa cum laude from Princeton University, for which he received a degree in electrical engineering and computer science. Bezos was offered a job straight out of college from companies like Intel and Bell Labs, but he chose to work for a telecommunications startup where he quickly climbed the corporate ladder. From there, Jeff moved on to work for a new startup, a hedge fund called D.E. Shaw & Company. In only 4 years, he became their 4th senior vice president at only 30 years old. As a matter of fact, he got the inspiration for Amazon from one of the tasks that his boss gave him at D.E. Shaw, where he had to explore the potential capability of the internet.
Where did you get an idea for Amazon.com?
Well, 3 years ago, I was in New York City working for a quantitative hedge fund when I came across the startling statistic that web usage was growing at 2,300% a year. So I decided I would try and find a business plan that made sense in the context of that growth.
He was still working for D.E. Shaw at the time when he dove headfirst into the online world to start Amazon. During one of the cross-country drives from New York to Seattle, the idea from Amazon was born. On that trip, he made a list of things he could sell online and ended up settling on books because the demand for them was universal and the overall cost was low. Now, living in Seattle, Jeff started an online bookstore, which was first called Cadabra, out of his garage. After a year, he jumped ship, leaving Wall Street and D.E. Shaw, putting everything he had into this new company. He also decided to change the name of the bookstore to Amazon, named after the Amazon River. Jeff's parents didn't support him at first. Sure thing, kid, sounds like a smart move. Leave your cushy, high-paying Wall Street job and start selling books on the internet? Which, by the way, what the hell is the internet? Does it even work? Is anyone gonna use it? At the time, nobody knew. But after some time, they changed their tune and ended up giving Jeff a whopping $300,000 from their own life savings to invest in his little business. He warned them about the risks and told them how volatile it might be, but they still stood by their son.
His first investors? His parents, who he talked about with the Academy of Achievement.
My dad's first question was, what's the internet? Okay, so he wasn't making a bet on this company or this concept. He was making a bet on his son.
Amazon went public 3 years later. Along the way, of course, there's a lot of naysayers, and Jeff ignored all of them, feeling confident that the internet would eventually overtake the brick and mortar retail book giants like Borders and Barnes & Noble. And he was right. He expanded the company even further in 1998, adding online music and videos. Time magazine recognized him as their Person of the Year in 1999 for the impact he'd made on online shopping. But Jeff didn't stop there, taking on consumer goods, snapping up smaller competitors, and creating Amazon Web Services.
AWS is the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud platform.
Don't be fooled, it actually wasn't a straight shot to the top. Amazon almost went bankrupt in 2002. They were bleeding from all sides and there were a million problems, but that didn't really stop Jeff. A decade later, he had become the CEO of the world's largest online shopping retailer. From 1998 to 2013, Amazon acquired no less than 44 companies, further expanding the Amazon empire. It was soon to no surprise that Amazon was a bona fide global giant, with the majority of its money coming from its online stores and marketplace. Becoming a giant company means that you're going to be under the spotlight for everything you do. So of course, after all this money and power, everybody starts questioning, saying, hey, you have all this money, dude. Are you going to do something good with it? What's up with the philanthropy? So how does one of the wealthiest people on this planet spend their money? One of the most well-known purchases he made was the Washington Post. He bought the newspaper in 2013 for $250 million. He's also one of the country's biggest landowners, and although it's really hard to tell how much land he actually owns, here's just a quick list of some of his houses so you can get a perspective on it. He has one estate with 2 homes on 5.3 acres of land. He also bought a mansion in Beverly Hills for $24.2 million in 2007. He also owns a massive ranch in Van Horn, Texas, which is used as a base for Blue Origin, which is that space exploration company he has. Oh yeah, and he also casually dropped $80 million on 3 adjacent apartments on 5th Avenue in Manhattan. Quick side note, do you know the Warner Brothers? You know these guys? Yeah, well, Jeff bought Jack Warner's estate in Beverly Hills for a whopping $165 million fucking dollars. It's been reported that he still drives his Honda Accord, but that sounds like something I would say just to appeal to more people if I were a billionaire. I'm pretty sure he's just bullshitting. And the reason why is because his air travel is way more luxurious. He bought this $65 million private jet. He also built that stupid ass clock that'll ring for 10,000 years inside a mountain somewhere in Texas for some reason. Well, for some perspective, we need to see how much money Jeff Bezos actually makes. And I think a good thing to do would just be to compare how much he makes versus like an average worker in the United States. So Bezos makes about $2,537 a second. That's double what a median US worker makes per week. That's about $152,000 per minute. And just for some context, him spending $1.9 million is equal to like an average American spending $1. He's twice as rich as the entire British monarchy. And even after his divorce had cost him up to 25% of his Amazon stocks, he was still the richest man in the world. And just for some fun little stats, he has enough money to buy 64,400 Bugattis. He can buy Larry Ellison's private island 644 times. Or he can buy 9.6 billion doses of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. That being said, I know most media companies like shit on Jeff Bezos because he's like the Lex Luthor, bald billionaire, evil archetype, but he's actually doing donated a whole bunch of money to charity that I want to take the time to kind of highlight because it's a good balance to have. He donated $10 million to the Museum of History and Industry in Seattle. He also dropped $100 million towards Feeding America, which supplies over 200 food banks across the United States. In 2011, he also gave $15 million to Princeton University, which they used to fund studies on neurological disorders. Then he donated $2.5 million to Washington United for Marriage. In 2013, he donated $500,000 to World Reader, which is a nonprofit that provides access to ebooks and e-readers. In 2016, he also pledged $1 million to match donations at Mary's Place, which is a homeless nonprofit in Seattle. In 2018, he dropped $33 million to the Dream.us, which is a nonprofit that funds college scholarships for immigrants. And shortly afterwards, he also donated $97.5 million to support educational programs for homeless families through the launch of Bezos' Day One Fund. Now in 2019, he donated $98.5 million to fighting homelessness and second round of funding for the Bezos Day One Fund that we just talked about. And just last year in 2020, he pledged $10 billion to fight climate change through the Bezos Earth Fund. Now, this is a ridiculous amount of money, probably more than I'll ever make in my lifetime, so I can't really point fingers and be like, hey dude, you're not really being philanthropic enough. I don't even think I've donated $100 to anything. Now, whenever you're that rich, you could use your money to solve a whole bunch of stuff. So let's take world hunger, for example. How big is this problem and can he actually solve it?
I'm back and forth with you bitches, living my best life. Ain't going back and forth with you niggas, living my best life.
World leaders at the UN are calling for solidarity on World Food Day, which is today, to help populations lurching from one food crisis to another and to strengthen their nutrition.
According to the World Health Organization, hunger is the single greatest threat to world health. It's the leading cause of death around the globe. When you think about world hunger, you might picture a complete lack of food. But hunger is not simply an empty stomach or even the most extreme, which is starvation. What hunger actually means is that someone is suffering from some level of malnutrition. Think of it this way. If you take 100 people that are actually suffering from hunger, only 8 of them are physically starving. The other 92 are suffering in silence due to malnutrition-related diseases. A food security report in 2020 estimated that 8.9% of the world's population, which is about 690 million people, suffers from one form of hunger. Today, scientists use the Food Insecurity Experience Scale to measure people's actual experiences when it comes to hunger. These metrics look at how many meals are being skipped, how many people have enough food to eat, and how many people have run out of food completely. In 2019, it was determined that approximately 750 million people in the world, that's 1 in 10, are severely food insecure. That is, going an entire day without food. So you would think somebody that can actually help these people would. If you had a lot of money, way more than you actually ever needed in a million lifetimes, you would expect them to do something about it. But is that even possible? Is there any amount of money that could solve world hunger? Statistics show that it would take $25 billion to solve the problem of hunger in the US alone. On a global scale, it would be anywhere from $7 to $265 billion. Whoa! Wait a minute, that's a huge gap. $7 to $265 billion? Well, let me explain. $7 billion would only help reduce malnutrition. $265 billion would be needed to actually end world hunger. But then I also read that the UN stated that it would take $30 billion each year to stop world hunger. In fact, the United Nations signed an agreement back in 2015 to end hunger by 2030. That's looking pretty unlikely at this point since hunger levels have been rising over the last 3 years. Now, with COVID-19 greatly impacting our world's food system, that goes even further out. Now, as you can tell, this is getting a little bit complicated because you're adding numbers that vary wildly. I mean, from 30 billion to 300 billion, who knows how much money actually would take to solve world hunger. And then you have to go into systems of delivery. I mean, how are you gonna actually deliver the food to those people who actually need it? Before you start typing, oh my God, tax the rich, eat the rich and all this shit, the government has a lot of money. I mean, we pay a shit ton of taxes. They should be able to handle this. So it's not necessarily a money issue alone. In this one example, the government project that has been bleeding money is the Homeland Security's new headquarters, which right now is running up to $4.5 billion. Oh my God, it's 11 years behind schedule and more than $1.5 billion over budget. Anyways, I'm getting a little bit carried away, so now let's go back to Jeff Bezos. The point I'm trying to make is that you can't really force people to do something with their money that they don't want to. It's kind of like somebody walking up to you right now and saying, hey, I need you to donate $47 to this charity. You're like, dude, fuck off. What are you talking about? Now, most of you could probably afford $47. And before you come too quick to the comments saying $47, dude, I can't afford that. I'm not rich. Listen, if I printed out the last 3 months of your bank statements, I'm pretty sure I'll find $47 there that you're just wasting on some dumb shit. And I know for a fact I will probably never be in a position to donate $100 million to something, to anything. Well, $100 million to him relative to his wealth is like nothing. It's like, yeah, but $100 million is still $100 million. Are you gonna be donating $100 million? Probably not. But that being said, everybody has a dark side. This may sound like a corny ass question to ask, but is there a sense of community anymore? Think about it. If someone is truly in need, are we compelled to help them? This is something that I constantly ask myself. So I know from a personal standpoint, I don't feel like there's a sense of community. And I think it's an important conversation to have, because if we're not part of a community, then what are we? We're just individuals who don't give a fuck about each other, moving through life on survival mode. Whether we like to or not, we're incentive-based creatures. And what I mean by that is, if someone says, hey, for every 10,000 steps that you take, I'm gonna give you $1,000, you're gonna be incentivized to try to take 10,000 steps as quickly and as often as you can, because there's an incentive behind that behavior, which is kind of a sad reality when you think about it. We all think we're good people, of course. I'm sure no one intends to be a bad person. But then when you think about how much food we waste, or how much garbage we create, and the last time we genuinely did something to help our community, you might be thinking for a while to remember that moment. Now, that's human nature. It's greedy. It's kind of like a selfish machine, just focused on survival and getting more and more and more. And it sounds hopeless to do anything for others because it might not seem like you're making a big difference. Like, honestly, who gives a fuck if you recycle one bottle of glass? It doesn't really matter. Or what about voting? Will one single vote really matter? Not really. And is $15 towards a charity really gonna make an impact? Probably not. However, whenever we act as a community, as a group, and we do some of these things, that's when it matters. When we're looking out for each other, trying our best to do our best. Whenever people get together for a single goal, they do make a big impact. Now, the dark side of Jeff Bezos is the dark side of each and every one of us. We like to point fingers and scream out solutions to these problems, putting the burden on other people, whether it's a single person or a group of people, when in reality, we don't really have to wait for anyone else to solve that problem. We can just start with ourselves. And if everyone really thought that their actions impacted other people and they had the same goal, you wouldn't ever have to depend on some bald rich guy to solve a problem. I mean, the world's ending, you know, there's like this climate crisis, and then you have like the homeless crisis, and there's a fire here, and there's problems there, and you're like, Jesus Christ, dude, I'm just trying to get a latte and be on time for work. So, I mean, when do you actually think for a second, hey, there's this thing that I could have an impact on? But the goal of this channel is to present questions and not answers. So I'm very curious to know what you think. Do you think there should be more taxes towards these rich guys? Do you think that's really the problem, or is it more of a systems problem? You know, delivering the help to the people that actually need it? Or is it the government having the systems and having the money, but just being, you know, stupid about it? If you did like this video, consider subscribing just so I can tell my mom I'm doing something productive with my life. See you soon. Love you like a headache.